Exploring small moments of lasting impact, it's the Atomic Jolt podcast with your host, Martin Cartledge.
Today, I am honored to have a good friend of mine, Caleb Paul. We met in Portland at a programming technical school like 4 or 5 years ago. But yeah, I'm excited to talk. How you doing, Caleb?
I'm good. Wow, that it's been that long. Like hearing you say 4 to 5 years, it's like,
Yeah.
I guess it has been. It really has.
I started that sentence and didn't know where it was going. And I was like, oh, it's been 2 years. And then I was thinking, no, that was like 2016, right?
2016, we started. Yep.
Wow. Yeah. Well, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing pretty well. Can't complain.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited. So if I understand it correctly, we're going to be talking about music. And really quickly, just one of the first things, even though we met in like a computer technical programming environment, one of the first things I learned about you was how much music meant to you. And you performed a lot around the area in Portland. It was always kind of something that was brought up in conversation, something that meant a lot to you. So I'm excited to talk about it with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. There was, I sort of had this residency at a really, really tiny space, which was great because, like 12 people would come in and it would feel packed. I was sort of putting together these monthly events, and I eventually started branching out of music a bit and sort of having, like poets would come and do poetry in between two different musical sets. I had one friend who'd just written a book and she's a very funny writer, and she read excerpts from her book. It was really fun. And then I was hoping to keep it going while we were learning to code. And that sort of took all my brain power. So it fizzled a bit, but yeah, that was certainly something I spent a lot of time doing right around the time we met.
Yeah. And so was that something like, because I know you were really involved in like doing shows and things like that. Was that something that you had like direct involvement in? Like you would like book these shows and like kind of bring different artists together, or was that someone else, or what was that collaboration like?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really, I was booking those. I was the main person, sort of in touch with the venue. It's sort of the owner of this bar and restaurant. And then, I just sort of had a night, so this once a month, this was my night, and I had 3 hours of entertainment to fill. And I generally tried to just play one set, so I would play anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. And then ideally, I loved having other songwriters and other people come in. I had some friends who were touring through the area, and it was super cool to be able to say, I already have a venue, I already have a night, like you can do this show. If you want to do another show in Portland, feel free, but like you definitely have one gig here. So it was nice to be able to set that up when it happened. And yeah, traditionally, I think I've been the person that's like on the other end of that. Like up until I started doing that, I've always been the person that's like, oh, let's like put together a bill, and this other person's the one who actually knows the promoter or the venue. So it was really good to sort of get that experience of managing the whole thing,
Yeah. Do you enjoy that type of stuff, like the organizational and bringing people together?
I like being there when it happens and it all works, like I like seeing my friends play and hearing new songs, and having other people bring their following and seeing folks mingling. But yeah, the scheduling, it's like so administrative, right? And I was thinking about that recently. It's sort of like if you especially these days with content creation, right? Like with your podcast, like you have to really be on top of your scheduling and be on top of your timing. And, you might just want to talk and exchange ideas, but you need to maybe learn audio engineering, and maybe you want to build a website for your podcast. You don't know how to do that. So you've got it. So there's all of these auxiliary skills outside of the core interest. Like if you want to have a YouTube channel about singing, you're probably going to need to learn a bit about cameras and video production and video file formats and, like all of these auxiliary things. So for me, I think the reason I hadn't done that before is because I'm so motivated by the core thing, which is playing guitar, singing, writing songs. and much less motivated with the promotion aspect. And that's still true today. And that's probably why I'm not playing as many shows as I was during that period. But yeah, I really like doing that. I guess for me, what the core activities of that, those are the most fulfilling, is just sitting with the instrument and singing.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that makes sense. The administrative stuff is usually not why people get into the core thing, and it's honestly, like you mentioned, it's and like an afterthought, and it's kind of like you discover along the way of, oh wait, if I want to do this, I actually need to like call this person or email this person or figure out a way to like keep my calendar in sync or something like that. Like all of the like less glamorous, like you mentioned, auxiliary skills. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So what kind of music do you play? Where in Portland did you usually play? Like what is the general vibe of the areas you'd play?
Yeah, I generally preferred small venues because at the time I was performing alone. I would say solo acoustic, but I had an electric guitar that I didn't play super distorted. I played it nice and cleanly, so it's solo electric, but I was playing folk songs, on an electric guitar. And so I liked smaller rooms for that because it didn't feel like I was filling some big space or like I had to fill a big space. And also as a songwriter, it felt more intimate. It felt like people could sort of catch the lyrics, people could catch the story. It felt very casual to address the audience between songs. So the place I played a lot was called the Jade Lounge, and I haven't checked in. Hopefully it's still there, with the last couple of years that we've had. And it was right off of Burnside on East Portland. I think one of the streets adjacent to Burnside, like Ankeny, one of the parallel streets. And yeah, I played there before, with other people setting things up, and eventually just talked to the owner and booked something there. But yeah, a couple of the other small places I played are closed now, unfortunately. There was a place called the Camellia Lounge in Northwest that I'd play pretty frequently. Here in the Northwest, we have the chain of restaurants called McMenamins. So I've played at a few of those. And then actually recently, when right as things started shutting down, so sort of that summer, well, I'd say the summer before things started shutting down, so 2019, I started doing a decent amount of house concerts, which was really, really fun. And I enjoyed that quite a bit as well.
Yeah. So two things that kind of came to mind. So McMenamins, what was the general kind of crowd like there? What was it like playing at a McMenamins?
Yeah, so that, those types of gigs are fun. Like if I'm playing like a listening room, right, where people are coming because they know me and they know sort of the songs and experience, that I try to sort of foster at those shows, then I can play almost all originals. I can tell the stories about the songs, and it can be this super like cozy, intimate experience. When I'm playing a bar, which I've done a bunch, it's usually not what I seek out, but back when writing code wasn't my day job, I would take a lot more gigs. And now I get to be pretty picky. But there, it's sort of a challenge of playing familiar things to sort of win the audience over and then mixing in originals, So somewhere like that, I would cover like, I'd do a Van Morrison cover or do, like you can do all these different things. Like I would cover Hendrix, but do it sort of in a acoustic finger picky style way and really kind of turn the song sideways a little bit and get people to, oh, there's something cool going on over there in the corner, that guy with the guitar. And then you can kind of mix things in. So yeah, the show at the McMenamins, actually, I want to say it was the White Eagle Saloon. That was with another great friend, Ben Crow, and great songwriter. And I think we had another act with someone that he knew. And there it was just a bunch of our friends who loved our music and loved live music in general came out. So that was a pretty fantastic evening. And at that point, I was playing with a percussionist. So it was sort of a duo gig. That was one of our early duo gigs. So yeah, that type of environment is really fun to have. It's not a full drum bass, it's not a full band, but having that percussion there for the more up-tempo songs and get a little bit of foot stomping and hand clapping going, it's pretty fun.
Yeah. And I guess you inadvertently kind of answered one of my follow-up questions, but do you think because playing at like a venue like a McMenamins versus a house show, the vibes are very different? And it's like what you mentioned, the audience expectations are. Do you enjoy that eclectic kind of nature of it? Or would you prefer if it was up to you to only do like a certain kind of show forever, like only house shows or only this or that? Or do you like doing a little bit of different things?
That's a great question. I think if you'd asked me that a few years ago, I'd have said just house concerts, because I do love that. But sort of during the pandemic, I think my quote unquote pandemic hobby, I guess, has been like arranging instrumental guitar parts, guitar songs, which if you followed my Instagram, I don't know if you do, you've probably seen some of those. I posted a cover of a Celine Dion song that was instrumental, a really short snippet of a Dave Matthews Band song that, carried the melody and bass line and was instrumental. So I've sort of gotten into just working on the technical part of playing and arranging in that way. And right now I don't perform those anywhere else except Instagram. So it would be fun to sort of throw those types of covers and things like that in. But I think my answer is still the same. If I did have to choose one, then having an intimate space is absolutely preferred. There was one organization that sort of facilitates those, and I think there's some controversy around them because they don't, people think they don't pay artists enough, which is probably fair. So I don't want to say the name, but the format, I'll tell you the format. The format is, as a listener, you essentially buy a ticket and you know that you're going to see 3 acts, and it's going to be at a house in your area. And I think as the date approaches, I don't know if it's the day before or the week of or something, then you get access to the address and which acts are performing. So I've done that a few times as well. And that's been super fun because these are like people who are like, okay, 3 cool like local acts, songwriters. I don't even have to know who they are. I'm going to show up. I'm willing to sit on the floor in someone's living room. So they're super receptive. They love music, and it's also a great way. I've met some other local musicians and songwriters that I don't think, I hadn't run into in my time in Portland so far. So like that environment it's just so eclectic and neat. And I think it's harder to get that than to book a bar gig where you're background music. I also played, I had another regular gig at the Multnomah Athletic Club, which is like, for people who aren't from Portland, it's attached to the arena where Timbers, the professional soccer team, plays. You can actually watch games from there, which is wild. I don't know how that works with Timbers tickets. There's like a waiting list to get in. So it's almost like if you think of like a country club for golf, except in its athletic club, sort of like, and it's super expensive, right? I don't want to say exclusive, but it's super exclusive. I would play there, and that was really fun because they sort of have this lounge that's by the outdoor pool. It's this outdoor bar. So I played there in the summers, and that was another one of those where it was just fun to sort of do these different covers, and because I think that's what people, like, you're there for background music. People, they've got their towels and they're gonna go grab a beer before they go back and sit by the pool, and they're hanging out listening to music. And those gigs are fun too. Often they pay better.
I was gonna ask.
Yeah. But it's also longer. Like, I would be there for a gig like that. I would be there for 3 hours, and I would probably take 2 15-minute breaks or one long break in the middle. So, it's a different type of work, to be sort of hauling your gear, navigating elevators, and then playing and singing for that long. But yeah, I think at this point now, because I have a day job that thankfully is pretty steady, I can be pretty selective about the type of gig that I choose.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So with you kind of ideally only doing like house stuff and performing your original songs. So I do want to dive more into kind of the meanings behind a lot of your music and themes and kind of where that comes from. But rewinding just a little bit more, I mean, how long have you been playing music?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been participating in music, I would say, my whole life. My dad's a pastor, so um, and we grew up in the Caribbean, so it's this sort of Caribbean. I grew up in Trinidad specifically. This sort of Caribbean Pentecostal style worship that was pretty, charismatic and lively. Um, and it's just like the congregants, the folks who would come to church, like everyone is super engaged. There's tambourines, like you almost don't need a choir because everyone in the room is singing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's very lively and engaged, and um, singing was always something that I did. And in high school, I did jazz choir and things like that. And then the guitar, um, I actually picked up. It was an interesting circumstance. I had always been an athlete in high school. So I had my fall sport, which was cross country. The winter sport would be basketball. And in the spring, I'd run track. Um, so I was always going to practices after school and then going home after practice. And I would have, meets and games, different places around town, and coming home late on the bus, things like that. And I had a knee injury that sort of sidelined me. Um, and it was like the first time I could just go straight home after school and I didn't have to go to practice. So for me, I had like all this quote unquote extra time and didn't know what to do. And my best friend at the time, Blake, he was taking guitar lessons. So he had this acoustic guitar that his parents got for him. And I was like, oh, it'd be cool if I could just learn like one song, like in Eugene, it's not uncommon for there to be guitar in someone's living room, maybe everywhere, but I don't know, like late 90s, I guess, early 2000s, I don't know. But so I was like, oh, it'd be cool, like, if I'm ever at a campfire or wherever, just kind of hanging out in someone's backyard, it'd be cool if I could just sort of play one song on the guitar and then pass it to someone else, and that was like the gateway. Like I learned some chords and I learned this Ben Harper song. And then, before I knew it, I was like playing Ben Harper covers at open mics and then started writing my own material. So yeah, it really started because these two things happened at the same time. I got injured, so I had time. And and my friend was taking guitar lessons. And this was actually also the same friend that turned me on to Ben Harper. So we both provided the guitar and sort of the musical idol that I ended up, learning a bunch of his songs. So it was really interesting timing in that regard. And I don't know if I hadn't gotten that injury, if I would have turned to the guitar, because at the time, especially the acoustic guitar, I just associated with like Garth Brooks and country, so I don't know that I would ever, like, had I not found Ben Harper's music, I don't know that I would have ever picked up an acoustic guitar as a hobby on a whim. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Well, that is inadvertently kind of like touching on the next piece. Was guitar, more specifically acoustic guitar, something that was like intentionally sought after for you? But it sounds like in your kind of mental model, you were like, oh, that's like 90s country, and that's not really something I am wanting to do in my life right now.
yeah, totally. And what's funny is now, like, there's artists, like Patsy Cline, like there's artists who, there's these country artists that I actually love now.
Yeah.
But again, that's sort of like the older, I don't know, maybe they called it country western back then. I don't know, but it's more classic, I guess you could say. But yeah, at the time I was absolutely not seeking that out. And really, I knew I had, I could sing and hold pitch and things like that. But my parents had gotten me piano lessons when I was younger, and it never really clicked. Not that I was bad at it. It just didn't inspire me, like I was never like, oh, I really am motivated to learn this song or learn these things. And the guitar was completely different. And that's actually the hardest thing now. When I would give lessons, I don't have as much time to do that anymore. But when I would, it's like, oh, I'd have a student and they'd say, oh yeah, I've got to practice. I've got to make time to practice. And for me, it was like, oh, I get to play my guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it wasn't ever like, oh, I have to motivate myself to go. It's like, where it absolutely was like that for me when I was younger playing piano. So it's a little bit even hard for me to relate to like students sometimes when they are not motivated to practice, because I've just always loved it. So that I guess it maybe there's something about not just being drawn to music as a whole, but potentially being drawn to a specific instrument. And I'm certainly not unique. Guitar is a pretty popular instrument that I think people fall in love with, but I'm one of the many.
Yeah, no, and that's an interesting point and an observation, teaching someone music, because I would, like, the most loose term, consider myself, like, I probably would have considered myself a musician in like my really bad high school bands, but I was never really a musician. I never took time and really learned anything of real structure. And I think for me, I love music, but I never had that, like, that click, that moment that you're kind of talking about of like, oh, this is interesting. I don't look at it as a chore. I just want to invest my time in it. And I want to get better at it. Do you think, because you said your parents, you were kind of raised in a home where like music was around, you had piano lessons, it didn't really click with you. Do you think part of, other than getting injured, do you think that the reason why you like guitar was because there was a lot of time in between and some like growing up and some life that happened, or was it like a different instrument, or do you think it was just kind of circumstance?
That's a great question. I think I had a knack for it for whatever reason. You know, like my friend was taking lessons, as I mentioned, and I was just sort of tinkering around with it. And I learned to read. There's this sort of casual layman's notation called guitar tabs. That's not, you know, sheet music, so there's not a traditional staff and things like that. But it literally just tells you where to put your fingers and which fret with numbers. So I was just sort of going online and looking at tabs, and I was progressing faster than he was. And that's not a diss on him. I think it's just that for whatever reason, the dexterity or the mechanics of it sort of fit my hands, and that was rewarding. It's always rewarding to make progress, right? So yeah, I don't know. But at the same time, it also sort of meshed with me being motivated to learn Ben Harper songs and really falling into that. What's funny is that, so this would have been, you know, freshman, sophomore year of high schoolish. Like up until that point, like people would ask me like, oh, what kind of music are you into? Like other kids. And I'd be like, I don't know. I'm not really that into music, because I guess I didn't necessarily seek out a bunch of bands. I think a lot of kids at the time were into like Metallica and Nirvana, and I have more of appreciation for those bands now than I did back then, but I just hadn't heard a ton that inspired me. And then when I heard Ben Harper's music, it was super inspiring. I guess had I heard a musician or songwriter who played the piano, maybe I would have been, you know, motivated to go back and play piano. I don't know. But for me, yeah, I think it was this sort of fortuitous knack of me having a little bit of a natural affinity with the instrument, and then the musician that really inspired me to learn his songs, you know, played the same instrument. So the timing just worked out there. The cards sort of fell into place.
Yeah, that is yeah, honestly not what I would have expected, that you weren't really, I would say, like into music, you know, wasn't something that really you know, you really followed or paid much attention to. Do you think that's because you know, with your dad being a pastor, kind of growing up in that environment, your only real, like, I guess, exposure to music was just kind of like church music, and you were like, oh, this is just kind of like tightly coupled with my dad's job, and this is kind of like his life, and you didn't really think of music too much outside of that? Or why do you think it wasn't just simply because it was just the inspiration thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember hearing certain songs on the radio. Like, I can still remember when I heard them, and these are two very different bands. But I remember being a kid when we were still in Trinidad and hearing Jackson 5, I'll Be There, I think is the name of that song.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, you know, at probably some family or church event, there were a ton of people there. People were talking, and the song was on the radio somewhere. And I remember wishing that everyone would shut up so I could just listen to this song, because it was the first time I'd heard it. And I remember that song sort of grabbing me in a different way than the other music that would come on, and the songs we'd sing at church. But I didn't necessarily like pursue it. Like I didn't ask my parents to get me the CD, or it might have even been a tape back then. I was just like, wow, that was beautiful. And then, went around with whatever else it is I was doing. And then the other time was when I heard, I was in the US at this time, and I heard Radiohead. I heard Karma Police on the radio.
Great song.
And I was like, what is this? Like, this doesn't sound like radio. Like radio, like at the time it was just sort of like, semitone kind of life, you know what I mean? Like it was sort of these like,
yeah,
or Blink 182 or whatever else. And again, like I actually love Blink 182 a ton. But the song, just for whatever reason, it stood out differently. And yeah, so there's these instances where I would find things that I really, really liked, but for whatever reason, I never really like ran out and got the album and was like, okay, I'm a Radiohead fan, or I'm like, sort of this like Motown soul, Jackson 5 fan. I think I never really like latched on into it as part of my identity until I started listening to Ben Harper, So
yeah,
it's like, oh, this I like, and I'm actually going to buy every record and go to shows and do the whole thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it, for whatever reason, to my ear, it was just a handful of things that sort of stood apart. So I didn't necessarily feel like I could say, oh, this is my favorite band or favorite artist, because it didn't happen very often at that time that something really grabbed me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So music is obviously a big part in most churches, and I imagine same with one like your dad was a pastor of. So he was, I imagine, pretty excited when you started taking like a serious interest in guitar and music. What did your parents think of it?
Yeah, they were super supportive. I think they recognized that it was something, I was super excited about. I think every parent, like is excited to see their kid pursue, a healthy passion or hobby. So that was the case. But, we didn't have a ton of money at that time. So it was a long time until I actually got a guitar. And once I got interested, I think the songwriting is what drew me in with the Ben Harper stuff. But I think once I really started getting into the physical mechanics of producing sound on the instrument, I got really into like Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix. So my mom eventually bought me what now I'd consider is like a pretty cheap guitar on QVC. But I remember we had figured out like what day it was going to show up, and I sat on the sidewalk, like at the edge of our house, like waiting for the UPS truck to bring the guitar in, because I couldn't like handle waiting inside. So yeah, they've been super supportive this entire time. Actually, when I would visit their hometown, well, not their hometown, because our hometown's technically in Trinidad, but when we're living in different cities and I would go visit them, like my mom would like hustle and like help me book a gig, because it wasn't just that she wanted to like hear me play, because I could do that in the living room. She like wanted to see me perform somewhere. So she would sort of collaborate and book gigs when I would go visit them for things like Thanksgiving or, whatever holiday I would be traveling. And that was always super fun, because it would be like, my mom's a college professor, so it'd be like her friends and coworkers would come down and things
cool.
like that. And usually like a coffee shop or something pretty casual. But yeah, they've been super supportive the entire time.
Yeah. Well, you're on a roll with kind of inadvertently answering my follow-up question, but did you say that your mom bought you a guitar off QVC, like the shopping network?
Yeah.
What was it? What was your first guitar? Do you remember like what brand or whatever it was?
I don't remember the brand. It looked like a Strat, so it was like a Strat copy.
Gotcha.
Right, and it was probably like, I don't know, it couldn't have been more than $200, I don't think,
Yeah.
But for me, it's like, hey, this is a black Strat. I've got, this amp that we probably got at a garage sale and a cable. So I'll be in my room, trying to play Stevie Ray Vaughan. So
Yeah. Well, that the bit about your mom like jumping in and like wanting to help and showing a lot more of like not passive support, but like pretty active support about something that you genuinely love. I imagine, like you just said, like it feels pretty nice, even though, with some of, maybe her coworkers and stuff like that, it's got to be kind of funny to like talk with your mom's coworkers at at a performance. But you have one kid, right?
Yeah, I have a daughter. She's 6.
And is she interested in music at all? How do you approach that? Are you like a passive or an active person with the whole musical influence? I'm curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. She has musical ability. Like she remembers a lot of the songs that she hears. Like even when we're driving, I'll have a song on that she's never heard before, and by the time the second chorus comes along, she's she's caught on to the melody and sort of the form of the song. There's a song they do at her kindergarten, this like cute good morning song, but it has a key change at the end of it. And I think they do it, with a CD, or maybe the teacher plays it in Bluetooth. But she nails this key change, like the last verse, the key modulates, and she nails it. And my wife is a music teacher, so my daughter's sort of been exposed to music in her childhood also, but in a different way than I was. So she has musical ability. I don't know that she knows that not everyone can hear things that well and reproduce tones accurately. For her, it's like a fun thing, but she's probably more passionate in like drawing and crafting. Like she loves making things. She has dolls and like her little stuffies, and she tries to like design outfits for them out of craft paper and and tape it. She's into fashion. So yeah, she has her hobbies. She does say that she wants to play the violin. And the piano. So we'll look into getting her lessons. But that's the fun thing of sort of being in charge of managing and raising and supporting another person. Like for us, it's just trying to expose her to things and seeing if it clicks, seeing if she likes it. And okay, how much does she like it? Does she want lessons, or does she just sort of want to tackle this at her own pace? But yeah, so far she's super into painting and crafting. Like she made a bird feeder out of a milk carton. That was really fun to see. So yeah, it's a little bit more in the, I guess, the traditional artistic side, as opposed to music as an art.
Yeah.
So far, but we'll see. She's got a long way to go. She's still 6. So
yeah. Well, it sounds like you're kind of taking like a page out of your parents' book, where you're a little bit more on the passive side around. They gave you lessons, but it wasn't like they were like, hey, we're really into this thing and you need to really do this. And they kind of gave you,
like they let me stop going.
Yeah. Because I think
they didn't. Yeah.
It sounds like they had enough foresight to be like, well, if we push Caleb to do this, he's going to resent this and he'll never want to do it. And so let's just be hands off. It's cool also that with your wife being a music teacher, I imagine she has a lot of, indirect influence. Is that something that you're completely open to? It sounds like you're just open to whatever she ends up wanting to do. That's totally okay. And I'm going to be doing music, and if she soaks in any of it, that's fine. But if she doesn't end up pursuing any of it, that's fine. You're ultimately just like what she wants to do. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. And also just sort of, I guess, a mindset that I think is healthy and I'd love for her to have, is just that you can participate in the things you want to participate in, and I say that because like very, very often, when I play, it'll be after the show and I'm like, maybe talking to some of the folks who attended, and invariably someone will say, oh man, I used to play insert instrument. I used to play the cello or the saxophone in band, or I used to play guitar, and or I used to play piano, and then I kind of fell out of it, and gosh, I wish I'd stuck with it. And for me, it's like, well, just start. Like you can get a decent guitar, but for whatever reason, people seem to think that like the ship has sailed. And you and I are both people who learned software development later in life, right?
Yeah.
And are now employed in those fields. So for me, it's very much like I had a coworker tell me the same thing. because I suppose I should do another one this year, but last year I posted an arrangement of, I can't remember what Christmas song, but it was an instrumental arrangement of a Christmas song to our company Slack. And when we came back from break, he's like, "Oh man, that was so cool." And gosh, I'd love to play the guitar. It's like, well, you can learn. Like you're an electrical engineer. You can. I'm assuming you can afford one. You know,
Yeah.
like if you want to do it, like you should absolutely do it. But I guess the point I'm meandering around is that very often I think people either see themselves as not a musician or a musician, right? And I think it's something anyone can participate in. You know, I think sort of the model of the musicians are on the stage and everyone else is in the audience is like not the only model. There's a lot of cultures where it's communal, and if you are watching someone sing, you're clapping your hands and you're contributing, or you're dancing and you're sort of involved in the performance. Like it's a more it's like a community event, as opposed to we stand on the stage and face this way and you stand in the audience and you face us, and it's this sort of one-sided thing. So yeah, that's something that I sort of, I don't know. People say that to me all the time and I never quite understand, you know, like for me, it just seems so accessible. Like if this is something you want, like, you know, the step to increasing proficiency and making music in your living room is it's not too far away, as opposed to me saying I want to be an NBA player. You know, it's like, well, you can go play basketball and shoot around at the park and hopefully that's fun. You know, like no one's coming up to me saying I wish I could win a Grammy. They're literally saying like, oh, I wish I never stopped playing the cello. It's like, well, you can still do that. You're 50 years old or 30 years old, you know, like you can absolutely do that.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, it's a really good point. It reminds me of this expression, and I might like have modified it, and I might have just been parroting it the wrong way for a long time. But something that always sticks out to me when I think of things like that is the best time to do this was yesterday, and the next best time to do it is today. So that's just kind of what I always think too, of like the same kind of thing. I mean, that's what I thought of with software development on times where it's funny you mentioned it. I was like, oh man, I think I'm too old for this. I think I needed to be a 12-year-old in my garage, like disassembling a computer and going to college for computer science to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to do it. And things like that. I think more than anything, it's just like practice kind of trumps everything. Process kind of trumps everything. But that is like a really good segue into something I was curious about. So obviously in most of these things that we're into, music for you, there can be plenty of life lessons that can just be applied across the board. And I think that's a really important one, as far as just basically how I'm inferring it is, you know, not to be so caught up in outside expectations, or to kind of get out from in between your two ears and just start and just put yourself out there and just do it, you know, basically just start somewhere and just practice. Besides that, was there anything else that, you know, learning music, performing music, sharing music that you've learned that you'll, you know, pass on to your daughter, or that you've kind of carried on in your life?
You know, I think I understand a bit more of, like, musically some of my tendencies, right? Like I played in this East European folk ensemble when my wife was in music school, because they needed another rhythm guitar player apparently. And even though I wasn't enrolled, the professor was like, well, if he can play guitar, he can come, you know, hang out and play. And there was one day that I think the other percussionists and bass player couldn't come. So it was like sort of these horns and I think strings like violins and things like that. And then I was sort of the only one sort of holding down the rhythm. And I realized, I didn't know this up until then, because, you know, these rhythms are fast and, you know, there are these odd time signatures compared to what is the norm that I'd listen to. And I realized I have a tendency to drag, to slow down. So I was sort of constantly trying to tell myself, like, to stay ahead, stay ahead, stay ahead. Like, don't drag, don't drag, don't drag, because I identified that if I'm going to mess up, I'm going to mess up in this way. Like, right. Like for that particular song, it's not necessarily going to be a wrong note or anything like that. And it's probably not going to be me playing too fast. It's going to be me slowing down. And I think taking that, I think that idea of understanding, like, okay, like, how am I going to mess this up? It's sort of helped me. Like, and especially after learning coding, like in my career now, like I understand how I respond poorly on a tight deadline or when I'm stressed. Like I understand like what my tendencies are when I feel like I need to take a shortcut with a project. So I can, I can look at something and say, okay, well, if I was going to mess this up, I would mess it up this way. And as a result of that, I am someone who's sort of learned to be pretty organized at work, even though like I hadn't naturally been an organized person, because I didn't want to let things slip through the cracks. So it's sort of like self-scouting, I would say, right? Like you listen with a critical ear when you're practicing something. You record the way you're playing a piece and listen back and see where you mess up. Or the way like a head football coach, right? He would look at his team and say, okay, like how did that other team attack us last week? Like how were they successful against us last week? Okay, that's what we need to work on. It's that same concept. And I think it's something you do naturally when you're trying to progress as a musician. But taking that same concept and applying it to, like your career, or like my wife and I, like we know when we get stressed or when we get in conflict, like what our tendencies are. Like we know the things we can do that would hurt that, which for our personalities are different things, but it's often feels like the path of least resistance. And we know the things we need to do to resolve it, right? So it's not directly tied to music, but I think it's something that like every musician is sort of listening for, or probably even you, right? Like the first time you start podcasting, you're like well, I don't know about you, but a lot of people are like, geez, I say that many times, or that's what my voice sounds like.
Yep.
And maybe you can change that. Maybe you could try to say less, or whatever filler words, but you're listening back and trying to improve and understanding if I'm going to screw this up, if I'm going to prolong a conflict in my friendship or my marriage, this is probably how I would do it. It's because I'm stubborn, or it's because I'm introverted, or it's because this is sort of the pattern I'm going to perpetuate. So understanding where those landmines are for your particular mindset and personality is huge. And it's something I sort of at some point tried to consciously do. And I think a lot of us do it unconsciously, like, oh yeah, I want to get better at this. I screwed up this last project at work, or I'm chronically late to my restaurant job, or whatever it is. But yeah, that's something that has helped me in my career, definitely.
Yeah. So it just sounds like you're just being self-aware and just identifying and kind of having a proactive attitude towards things that maybe don't go right, and being able to kind of look at them, analyze them, and be like, okay, how am I gonna improve this in the future, or how am I gonna mitigate the negative side of this that this might have on someone else? Or maybe, like you were saying, with any kind of conflict, of recognizing I can feel that my voice gets higher, or I tend to ramble when I'm starting to get upset, or when I get home from work, I always mean to write down what I need to do, but sometimes I just forget. So I need to not do that. I think being proactive and kind of identifying those things, talk about being applied to basically anything. But yeah, no, that definitely would be something that I think everyone could benefit from doing.
And also understanding that someone else might have a completely different challenge, right? Like, so someone else playing guitar in this East European folk ensemble might have a tough time with the notes or the chords, or they might be playing too fast, right? So someone like that might give you advice like, oh, watch out for these chords. And, for me, my problem was really just the tempo and dragging. So I think it's understanding yourself, and, and understanding, and that sort of narrows the field of things that you need to like really work on, because you're not trying to like if you're trying to shoot a basketball, it's like, okay, set your feet and keep your elbow in and follow through and make sure your arc is good. But if you know the one thing that you really need to work on with your shot is really just the arc, and everything else is within an acceptable range, then that can be the main thing you're focusing on if those other things aren't the most detrimental. So it sort of narrows the field, I think, of what you need to focus on in these areas that can be stressful, like for me when I'm performing, right? Like that particular East European folk ensemble, the performances we did were accompanied with dance, actually, from the university's dance team, I believe, or it might have been a community dance organization. So definitely wanted the tempo to be right, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, understanding that can narrow the scope, and for me, it can actually be a de-stressor of understanding. Okay, this is a stressful time, but I know that if I were going to mess this up, it would probably be this way. So I'm going to stay on top of these one or two things, and I think my preparation should take me through the rest of the process. Okay.
Yeah, I feel like having a good sense of self-awareness and being able to focus on what's 6 feet in front of you, or just one thing at a time, the things you can control, are definitely great takeaways. I'm going to transition a little bit of like a speed round. So I'm just going to ask you a couple questions. Should be fairly, straightforward, quick to answer. Some of them I won't promise, that they'll be tricky, but I'll do my best. Okay. So I imagine you've owned a lot of guitars. What's been your favorite guitar and why?
Oh gosh. Yeah. There's one made by a guy named Dave Wendler in Kansas City, Missouri, and it was actually a custom guitar. It sounds fancier than it is, but yeah, it's the guitar I've probably gigged with the most, and I got to have some input in some of the specifics on it. But yeah, it sort of has this really interesting way of getting some acoustic sounds, even though it's an electric guitar. It's really, really light. Like I mentioned, playing some 3-hour gigs earlier, so it's extraordinarily light. Which I really appreciate, and it's an instrument that the sound sort of jumps off of. The sound really jumps out of it. I don't have to work as hard with my right hand to produce a sound, which is a nice feeling.
Yeah, I love it. So you mentioned Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix as big influences. If you were to be able to go, and of course they both have passed away, rest in peace, you were able to go to like a bar and have a beer and like a 2-hour conversation with one of them, only one of them, which one would it be?
Oh gosh. That's a really good question. I think I would have to say Jimi, just because I think a lot of what just sounds like rock guitar now, or sometimes even progressive guitar, at the time he was doing it, nobody else was doing it, so sort of the controlled feedback, and the way he used the wah pedal, and this guy named Roger Meyer designed these like octave pedals, and even the albums where he used these delay effects, a lot of that was so novel at the time, and applying some of these complex chords that you'd usually hear on a pretty clean guitar, like in an R&B setting. He would play these complex chords that usually don't play when you're playing distorted. Like we talked a little bit about Blink-182, and they did, I'm not saying this to diminish them, but they played a ton of power chords. Like their songs were easy for me to learn when I was getting into electric guitar. Because, it's like you have a distortion, you play these power chords, and it's clean, it's crisp, it drives the music. And Jimi would play these, flat 5/7 chords with like a fuzz pedal, and it just worked. So yeah, I would love to sort of talk about that, and just talk about his inspiration for the songs and lyrics. A lot of his lyrics are just sort of so out there, like he talks about colors, and like in The Wind Cries Mary, talks about the stoplights turning blue, and all of these really evocative images, as opposed to someone who's really just speaking very clearly about sadness or clearly about loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
I think his lyrics sort of painted these really abstract images. So yeah, I'd have to go with Jimi.
Yeah. I kind of expected it. I totally understand. I probably would have picked that same one. So like your dream setting for a gig, where would it be? It can be anywhere in the world. Any venue, any place.
Oh, wow. You know, I have to say, this is going to sound silly. I don't know. I think people would say like Madison Square Garden or something, but I have a great friend, Jillian Raby, and she would put on these amazing, like curated musical open mic experiences in Portland. And there was one that we did that was, I wish I could remember the name of the art gallery, but it was also on Burnside, on East Burnside in Portland, I believe. And at the time, there was this art in there, this installation that all of the art was dedicated to the life and career of Biggie Smalls. So like right when you walk in, there's a Super Nintendo and a Sega Genesis because he references those game systems. Famously, there was paintings and drawings of him and all these things that referenced his music. And at the time I performed there, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think I'd played a new song. And it was also the first time that I announced publicly, I think in person, that my wife and I were expecting, because we were sort of among friends. And it was just magical. I think she really has a great rapport with the community that she would put these events on for. So when she says, these songs and these songwriters are so dear to me, like, please do not speak while they're performing, like everyone listens. And I was actually just talking yesterday to a friend that I met through her. So I would have to give credit to my good friend Jillian Raby and sort of the music and songwriting experiences that she organizes and curates. If I could have, all my gigs be like that, I think I'd have a hard time complaining.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. That's really cool. That's basically it. I guess the only other thing is, if you have anything that you feel like people should know about it. I know you mentioned your Instagram where you're posting a lot of your music. Now is the time to plug any of your stuff.
Yeah, it's really just the Instagram, which is Caleb Paul Music, and that's where almost all of the guitar snippets are. I do have an old album that's out on all the streaming services under my same name, and I'm fairly active on Twitter as well, although that's less music and more, more memes. So it's a pretty clear delineation there. If you want music, go to Instagram. If you want, nonsense and political thoughts and memes, you can go to Twitter. So
yeah, you can never have enough memes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good stuff. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and talking with me today, Caleb. It's been really cool.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It's been great chatting with you.
Thank you again, Caleb, for joining the show. It was great hearing more about your musical journey and catching up. If you enjoyed the show and you're interested in supporting the show a little bit more, you can leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. If the podcast platform of your choice doesn't have reviews, you can follow us. That's probably the best way to support. If you're on social media and you're interested in following us on that, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Atomic Jolt Pod. That's Atomic Jolt POD. Thank you so much again for listening, and we'll see you next time.